Since its first ascent in 1953, the Everest has seen countless records being set on its steep slopes and rock faces, but not all have happy endings. In 1979, Hannelore Schmatz, an experienced German climber, set off to conquer the world's highest peak with her husband. The couple managed to reach the peak, but their descent would ultimately end with a tragic disaster, involuntarily setting a new dreadful record on Mount Everest. Hannelore Schmatz was born in Bavaria in 1940, and she grew up with a love for nature and the outdoors. In her late teens, she began hiking and climbing in the nearby mountains, eventually becoming an accomplished mountaineer. After her marriage with Gerhard Schmatz, they began climbing together on the highest peaks of the world, sharing the beautiful passion of mountaineering. Conquering peaks progressively higher, they started to climb the highest mountains in the world. In May 1973, Hannelore and her husband returned from a successful expedition to the top of Manaslu, the 8th highest mountain in the world, and still excited from their recent success, they decided it was time to climb the highest peak on Earth, Mount Everest. While waiting for their climbing request to be approved, the couple climbed several other peaks, including Lhotse, in preparation for the ascent. After renting a warehouse in Kathmandu to house all the materials needed for the expedition and putting together the team, everything was ready. On the team, besides Hannelore and Gerhard Schmatz, there were 6 other experienced high-altitude climbers that joined them on Everest. Among them were New Zealander Nick Banks, Swiss Han von Cannel, American Ray Jeanette, an experienced mountaineer who the Schnitz had conducted expedition with before, and fellow German climbers Tillmann Fischbach, Gunther Fix, and Hermann Warth. Hannelore was the only woman in the group, but this didn't mean in any way she was less skilled than the other members. In July 1979, everything was prepared and ready to go, and the group of 8 began their trek along with 5 Sherpas, beginning the slow climb of Everest. The team had decided to go through the Southeast Ridge route, and after reaching Everest Base Camp, they began the slow process of acclimatization. The weather was nice and everything was going as expected, with the team progressing in the climb. The mountaineers passed the Yellow Band, a band of sedimentary rock distinguishable for its color, set at an altitude of around 24,600 feet, and crossed the Geneva Spur, ultimately reaching the South Col. It was the 24th of September 1979, and the team decided to set up their last high camp on the South Col, spending the night there. The next morning, the 8 climbers were welcomed by a snow blizzard and were forced to descend back to Camp 3. The blizzard didn't show signs of stopping, and the team was forced to rest for 3 consecutive days. When the weather cleared off, the mountaineers were able to take up the climb again, but this time they split into 2 groups, separating Hannelore from her husband Gerhard. The 2 groups had different paces, and Gerhard's group was the first one to once again reach the South Col, setting up a new camp. While Hannelore and her team were still making their way back to the South Col, Gerhard and his team decided to continue with their hike to the Everest peak, leaving camp on the early morning of the 1st of October 1979. After encountering a few difficulties along the way, Gerhard's team was able to reach the Everest summit around 1 p.m. on the same day. The weather was starting to deteriorate, and from the summit, Gerhard described how he could see the bad weather on the south side of the mountain. Gerhard's group quickly made their way back to their camp, trying to avoid the approaching bad weather. During the descent, The bad conditions already encountered by the team on the way up were worsened, but the team was able to make their way safely back to camp. On the evening of the 1st of October, the two groups were reunited at base camp. Despite Gerhard's warning on the bad conditions of the ascent, Hannelore and her men decided to try the last push for the peak the next morning. However, she would never return from that desperate attempt. The next morning, Hannelore Schmatz and her group began their climb from the South Col to reach Mount Everest's summit at around 5 a.m. While Hannelore made her way toward the top, her husband, Gerhard, made the descent back down to the base of Camp 3 as weather conditions began to rapidly deteriorate. While descending, at 6 p.m., Gerhard received a communication from her wife communicating to him that they safely reached the summit. She was the fourth woman to climb the Everest. Little did he know, he would never see his wife again. Hannelore's descent started well, but soon took a turn for the worse. The combination of bad condition and exhaustion led Hannelore and her teammate Jeanette to decide to stop at 28,000 feet. Despite the warnings of the two Sherpas who were accompanying the two climbers, they ultimately set up a bivouac in the death zone, notorious for its high death chance. That same night, Jeanette passed away, probably from hypothermia, significantly distressing Hannelore. Despite the shock, she decided to continue with the descent. After a few hours, however, her body couldn't do it anymore. After sitting down and begging the Sherpas for water, she died at 27,200 feet. One of the two Sherpas decided to remain with her body, but ultimately, after losing some fingers and toes from frostbite, had to abandon her corpse. Her body was frozen in a sitting position, leaning against her backpack with eyes open and hair blowing in the wind, about 330 feet above Camp 4. It stayed there for the years to come, as a macabre reminder to the climbers going up and down her same route. Many have described her body as sinister and scary, and by 1984, a police mission was organized to retrieve her body. However, not even the military could take away that terrifying signal, resulting in the death of two police officers who fell while climbing the Everest slopes. Since that attempt, the mountain eventually took Hannelore Schmatz. A gust of wind pushed her body, and it tumbled over to the side of the Kangshung face, where no one would see it again, lost forever to the elements.